and welcome to Business Today Television. I'm Siddharth Zarabi and you're watching Easynomics. On the show today, we are going to discuss a political economy subject. And this is the 5 state assembly elections that are going to happen in November and how inflation is likely to impact or maybe not the outcomes in these elections. The data is very interesting, viewers. As you can see, these are the 5 states: Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Telangana and Mizoram, and between the 7th of November to the 25th of November, all of them will see voters in those states exercising their franchise. Now, let's take a look at another very interesting bit of data, and this is retail inflation in these states. Rajasthan at 6.53%, Telangana at 5.97%, Madhya Pradesh at 3.67%, and Chhattisgarh at 1.98%. Why is this important? Because the most recent data for inflation from government data, mind you, shows that the 5 states that have the highest inflation, and we'll bring that up once again, are Rajasthan, followed by Haryana, followed by Karnataka, Telangana and Odisha. And as you can make out, Rajasthan at 6.53%, this is retail inflation as measured by the CPI, and Telangana 5.97% are the 2 states amongst the top 5 when it comes to inflation that has prevailed in the most recently captured data. Now take a look at the states with the lowest inflation. If you take a look at the states with the lowest inflation, Chhattisgarh comes right on top. Again, this is one of the states that is headed for elections at 1.98%. Delhi, and there are no elections here, viewers, we are just telling you the top or the 5 lowest in terms of inflation. Delhi 2.24, J&K, West Bengal and Madhya Pradesh. So Madhya Pradesh also having inflation which is at 3.67%. Now the top 5 and the lowest 5. And what does this mean as far as the election outcomes are concerned? I have with me a panel of stellar guests who will help us decode the political economy and the impact of inflation on politics, because remember, it's not just these 5 assembly elections, it's leading up into the big fight of the summer of 2024. Shankkar Aiyar, political economy analyst, author and columnist with us. Madan Sabnavis, chief economist of the Bank of Baroda, is with us, and we're also joined by PN Vijay, founder and CEO of PN Vijay Financial Services. Thank you very much for joining us. I have tried to set the backdrop of today's conversation, today's episode of Easynomics, to try and make it easy for people, analysts and the average Aam Aadmi to figure out, will onion, tomato and other prices lead to electoral outcomes that the ruling parties in those respective states have not anticipated. Shankkar, I start the debate with you, with really the question being, is there a correlation between the high inflation that we have seen? And by the way, viewers, September saw a number of 5.02%, so that's much lower than most estimates. So inflation is clearly on the downtrend, but it's built up over time and that has led to various things, including interest rates hike. So Shankkar, is there a correlation, or should we forget the episode of the late Sushma Swaraj and what happened with onion prices in Delhi nearly 2 decades ago?
Well, most of the correlations is that funnily comes retrospectively. After they lose the election, they figure out that, oh, this was the cause. Because in the run-up to the election, nobody sort of admits that these could be issues. I suspect that, if we drill down further whether food price inflation was an issue or not, we could figure out. But on the face of it, two points. One is that both Telangana and Rajasthan have unveiled a number of cash payment schemes and you could call it populist schemes, and that reflects on their balance sheets, and probably there is some effect of that visible in the inflation. But this is, there could be 4, 5 different reasons why the states which show higher inflation are showing higher. One is that the distribution issues are there, whether there are storage issues, whether there are output issues, whether there's a monsoon issue. I think Madan might have more data on this than I have. But I suspect that this will have a effect on the elections. How much will depend on what kind of relief is being provided by those states.
Okay, that's a very important point. Shankkar is saying that it's not as if the respective state governments have not woken up to the challenge, and that's why we've seen a slew of measures which some people might call freebies, but the politicians in those states, the ruling party, will call absolutely essential. Madan, decode it from an economist's perspective, especially the point that I had for you, and I don't know whether you have ever worked on this data, the correlation and what Shankkar just said.
See, actually, Siddharth, if you look at the impact of inflation on election results, I think it's slightly blurred. When I say blurred, it is that the absolute inflation number which we are talking of today, say 5% or 6.8% in a particular state, may not really matter a lot. But I think voters tend to get affected by single product prices going up. Like, for example, if the elections were held maybe a couple of months back, I think tomato could have been a major issue, something which we have seen in the past where onion prices have managed to skew election results. But I think in the current kind of a situation where we also, as you mentioned, that inflation numbers seem to be coming down apparently, there's definitely not a case of saying that the prices are going up for any specific product which has that kind of an emotional connect with the common man, which is going to change the voting pattern. Now, this said, we should also remember that when we are talking in terms of higher inflation in states like Rajasthan and Telangana and lower inflation in Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh, one needs to see what are the factors which have actually driven up these inflation numbers. Now, typically, I think the weightage of your food basket varies across different states. And if you're looking at states like Rajasthan, for example, I think this is a state which normally does run into problems of generally charging higher prices for food products. And when there are shortages or perceived shortages because people are expecting pulses production to be lower, the prices tend to increase at a sharper rate in states like Rajasthan compared to states like, say, Madhya Pradesh or Chhattisgarh. Remember one thing, if you're looking at Chhattisgarh, it's a major producer of rice. And therefore, there is some kind of a comfort, that kind of panic reaction which sets in the market is not something which we'll see in a state like Chhattisgarh and by extension also to Madhya Pradesh, unlike what you see in states like Rajasthan. So these are generally states which we have seen which are susceptible to monsoon failures. Monsoon tends to affect the crop prospects more in these states compared to the northern states which have irrigation facilities. So therefore, I would tend to think that these inflation numbers may not really have a major impact because there are no specific products which have been showing this kind of spike, which could be making voters think in a certain direction.
PN Vijay, while the inflation data captures a certain basket that is a part of the data, there are lags, data deficiencies. A lot of people on the ground would say that this data perhaps does not capture real inflation, and especially in a certain kind of consumption basket which is not even part of our data, and therefore inflation is very pervasive, it is very, very deep rooted, and there is a difference between urban and rural inflation and the response. Do you think therefore the picture is clouded and we should not make these direct correlation between high inflation rates and likely electoral outcomes?
Well, it's an interesting question. In fact, it's two questions in one. First question was, should we try and make some correlation between inflation at that particular point in time and the way voters behave. I think there is that correlation. As you rightly pointed out, the Onion episode of Sushma Swaraj, which totally torpedoed her chances in Delhi way back when Delhi was considered a stronghold of the BJP. So it is right to think that inflation has a bearing on the way people think of the performance of the incumbent government. Now, a point coming to this four data points which you have put, as you have pointed out, the data is a bit blurred because some of the states are more urbanized than others. Some of the states are agri-producing states, and we've just had a monsoon which has been very erratic. So the ups and downs between consumers and producers, the complexities are there. And then, as was pointed out by another gentleman, the freebies have pushed a lot of cash. So ironically, the state governments have been pushing up inflation for their own good. So all this tends to blur the picture. But the takeaway I have is that inflation has not reached such a point in any of these states that this could be a turning factor or a decisive factor as we run up to the polls. It'll be one of the factors, but it will not be so decisive as we have seen in some of the elections in the past.
Okay, so one of the factors and not the sole or perhaps the key decisive factor. Shankkar Aiyar, therefore, what would be the economic issues? And I am trying to restrict the conversation to economic issues because the moment we bring in caste and OBC reservation and a survey, the discussion will get will go in a different direction. What are the major economic issues that you see having a play in these five states? And viewers, while we haven't mentioned Mizoram, that's because the data is not available. Don't think that we are trying to ignore a state in the northeast. That's at all not the intention. That data is not available there. But Shankkar, the question on what will play in these state assemblies.
Well, Siddharth, I also wanted to point out one more thing before I answer that question is there have been some moves from the center. If you notice the reduction in the price of gas cylinders for certain consumers, the ban on export of certain agricultural commodities, particularly sugar in the run-up to the festival election. So I think the political class is well aware of the fallout or the downside of not managing certain commodity prices. So as Madan said, if it's a single product episode, it has a greater danger of torpedoing somebody's case. Now, coming to the issues that matter in this election, I think the very fact that almost every state going to polls now has cash transfer programs for women shows that there is distress at the bottom of the pyramid. And that distress is basically about employment generation. Ironically, I mean, the two factors which impede employment generation, the power to change them are all with the state governments. I mean, land and labor laws are one the biggest impediments in bringing investment into any state, and law and order is the third part. And if you look at parliament data, the irony is that while there is unemployment, there are millions of jobs or at least hundreds of thousands of posts in each state which are lying vacant, particularly in critical areas like health and education and in police personnel. So I think employment is the single biggest factor, and because your income is affected, your affordability is affected, and therefore inflation may sort of have a peripheral picture. But essentially, it's the cost of living crisis.
Okay, cost of living crisis. Madan, would it be fair to raise the point that when the Delhi debacle happened, and that's perhaps one of the most easily recallable incidents where high food prices in one particular item led to a stark political impact. Would it be fair to say that the Indian economy has evolved since then? The consumer has evolved. There is greater income available with people, and therefore, the real issue is not high prices, but it is about income. And that's why politician after politician, state after state is resorting to these freebies as welfare measures to counteract the impact of high prices.
No, actually, what you're saying is true. I think what Shankkar mentioned about jobs, I think that is important. But at the end of the day, I think it's money which is received, which is really of primary importance for anybody who goes to cast their vote. Now, here, I think when we are talking in terms of money, it's not purely in terms of an employment which is giving me money. It's also a case of the benefits which I'm getting from any particular government or any particular party. One part is that there are certain promises made that if I come to power, you will get certain kind of benefits. That's one kind of thing which could be an enticement. The second part is where you give directly certain what you've called freebies. But actually, I have a different view when you're talking of freebies because for example, if you look at certain states which give free saris, free dhotis, free cycles, it's actually not a wasteful expenditure because there is demand being created. It's just that the government is financing it. So there is actually a development activity taking place. There are certain industries which benefit, only things that the consumer doesn't pay for it. But I think these are the kind of tangible benefits which individuals expect from whichever the ruling party or maybe the opposition party, whichever way it is. And we should also remember another thing is that sometimes I think when these kind of benefits which are given, these monetary benefits or in-kind benefits which are given, the recipient may not really know whether it's coming from the central level or from the state level. So I think that is what even parties are cognizant of. Because when you're getting a cylinder price coming lower, does the person really know it's coming from the center or from the state? How exactly is the budgeting done? Because we're aware of the fact that a number of subsidies given by state governments, something which we don't see when we look only at the central government subsidies, I think they tend to be more far-reaching because they're actually touching the person at the ground level. Because we should remember one thing in our kind of a federal structure, what the center does is from the top, it holds for all citizens of the nation, whereas specific states have specific programs, certain benefits, certain transfers, and they're closer to the citizen. Just like we say that we talk of the third level of government, the panchayat or the municipal corporation, they're the ones who are closest to the individual voter. The state definitely has that kind of access. So I think what really has happened is that you have these competitive benefits being given by different states. Like I will always like to give something more than what somebody else has given. I think that is the way in which this game plays out. Because at the end of the day, promises may be one thing because one is not sure if the promises are met on the economic front. Because once a party comes to power, you suddenly realize that there are fiscal constraints and may not be able to oblige the voters with what you have promised. But definitely with the kind of benefits you give in the run up to the elections will tend to matter more for citizens. And of course, on the whole, I think job creation is the best thing. But even jobs, one doesn't know if it's happening because of the center, the state, the private sector. That's something which still remains fuzzy.
PN Vijay, Shankkar Aiyar mentioned the cost of living crisis, and it's a very important issue because the cost of living will obviously matter more to those at the bottom of the sort of economic hierarchy, and as we head upwards, and there's a certain very small non-voting mostly class of people which won't be bothered by this cost of living crisis. Yet, does it mean that state after state, and when we head into the big national election, we are going to see more of these freebies, more of these measures by the administrative part to counteract inflation? Because the RBI has done what it could have done, yet prices haven't moderated so much in that way as far as the common citizen is concerned. PN Vijay.
Yeah, it's at the end of the day, you cannot look at cost of living in isolation. It is also to be linked with the income levels in the community. What's happened in India, in my view, is that the income levels of the bottom of the pyramid, or whatever you call it, a very large proportion of the population has not increased to the extent the cost of living has increased. So if you look at, and why is that so? First, because of jobs. We have had a nominal growth of more than 10 to 12% in the last 23 years since we had the reforms. But this has not resulted in commensurate creation of jobs. So that's not put income in the hands of the people. Second is the inequality. Whichever way you look at it, the phenomenal GDP growth has willy-nilly created a class of people who have got the benefits of this great economic reform. Whichever report you read, you find that 10% of of the people of India hold about 70% of the wealth and the income of this country. So we are having a rather distorted situation where we have headline GDP numbers which are very good, but these naturally lead to some level of inflation in the economy. That's obvious. But the bad effects of the cost of living or the inflation is felt by people who have not benefited in terms of income and jobs. This is, of course, a very, very serious crisis. If you look at the labor participation rate in India, it's less than 40%. And but unfortunately, the education level of the electorate in India is such that while in other free market economies, this would be the prime election issue in any other economy, in a free economy, here we get too distracted with other issues which are not so important to the livelihood of citizens. But there we are. So the end of the day, I agree with the other panelists. It's a job issue, it's an unemployment issue, it's an inequality issue. But do the people of these states see it that way? I really wonder.
That's a very good point. And viewers, if you were to just take one sector, this is housing. We know that the demand for housing in India is immense, especially when people living in the rural areas shift towards urban areas, the demand for housing goes up. But if you see, the difference between prices has meant that affordable housing as a sector, and just try and recall the last ad that you saw for a house on any newspaper or online, and you will realize that affordable housing is perhaps out of the scene. And that too echoes what our panelists have been saying, that it is simply becoming extremely expensive, unaffordable to have a reasonable housing unit in any of our metros, and that too impacts people. Shankkar, I come to you on trying to look ahead beyond these state assemblies, and this is the big summer 2024 outing. And when we do that, let's try and bring up an interesting graphic of prime ministers, their tenures, and the rate of inflation that has been seen. Again, the attempt is to try and look back, and there you have it on the screen, and we'll stay with that graphic. This is just the data. We are trying to look back. Indira Gandhi, the average inflation rate was 8.86%. Of course, the way it was measured, the basis and all of that, so please don't try and attempt a straight correlation. You see it in the 77 to 79 phase, 5.7%. Let's move to the next detail in this regard. Again, Indira Gandhi, 7.89%. Rajiv Gandhi, 8.12%. And if we keep going down the list, and you now have 89-90 short-lived phase, just about over 8%. And then the person who brought in reforms into India, Narasimha Rao, almost 10.5%. Again, there is some more that we have. Devi Gowda, 8%, just about a shade above 8%. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, 13.23%. So that's the number. And then you have the Manmohan Singh years, 10.26%, 8.86%, 4.76%, and in the first tenure of the Narendra Modi government, 4.76%. Shankkar, the reason we brought this graphic was to try and look ahead basis this data. It's clear that in the first tenure of the Modi government, and we had that period which also includes 3 years of the current tenure, overall average inflation much lower than previously. What does this tell us about the possibility of cost of living, as you put it, being an issue in the big election in 2024? Shankkar Aiyar.
Well, so that you have to look at it a little different. The historical perspective that Narendra Modi came with when he came to power in 2014 was, if you remember, BJP had raised all the inflation issues throughout the Manmohan Singh government's second tenure, or rather UPA 2. And gas cylinders and onion prices and food prices were perpetually in the headlines. Also because the inflation was really high. And so through his tenure, he has made a very direct, purposeful attempt to keep inflation down. And this has been one of his concerns. And that is also reflected in the frequently changing policy on export or import of agricultural commodities because food price. The second aspect is that this is the only government probably in the world which is feeding 800 million people free ration. So that's the second aspect. And third aspect is what kind of cash benefit transfers are happening in the economy. If you look at the National Payments Corporation of India has a portal which shows you just the number of states and the number of schemes that are listed on the Bharat DBT program. And there are around 7,000 registered codes against states and center for various schemes, and of which perhaps around 4,000 are active. It shows you that at every level, for different social segments and economic segments, state governments are designing schemes to deliver some relief or the other. Now, all of this combines to show that there is an issue at least the bottom two quintiles of the economy about employment generation. All over India, in just cursory research that I have done, there are over 2 million government posts vacant. But when you fill a government post, I think the political return is lower than when you actually simply send a check or make a cash transfer. And that's very visible in the system just now. Every opinion poll that has been done, and particularly the Mood of the Nation India Today opinion polls, will shows that over the last 2 or 3 years, unemployment or job creation, however you phrase it, has been at the top of the list of grievances. How this will impact the 2024 election depends on whether the other side has any option, any solution, any alternative model. We'll have to wait and see, because just now, I think, despite the economic issues, the emotive issues are on top of the mind.
Absolutely. Emotive issues are on top of mind, and perhaps they will continue to do so. Last questions to Madan and PN Vijay, and starting with you, Madan. How big is the welfare state in India? Shankkar has referred to it through his answers during the show. The central sort of attempts to countermand inflation, and state governments individually doing whatever they can. Do you have a sense of, you can share with our viewers, of how big is this entire welfare outgo that the combined states and center are incurring currently?
No, actually, Siddharth, Shankar has made a very pertinent point, and this is something which I also reiterate all the time. That when the government said that it's giving free food to 800 million people, it means the 800 million people who are deprived, who require support, they are needy. So when you have such a large population out of 1400 million, so many people are dependent on free food, it means that the size of the government has to increase, and it has to necessarily be a welfare state. See, we can camouflage it by saying we're spending a lot on roads. The states say we're spending on irrigation, rural electrification, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, I think what really matters for the people is what you get. And these 800 million people have to be supported in every possible way. Now, whether or not it makes economic sense, like we like to think that the fiscal balances should be run in a way which is more of the capitalist mode, where you spend more on capex and spend less on welfare. But I think at the end of the day, governments work for the people. You come to power based on the promises you made, so therefore you will have to spend. So even if you look at the central government, you spend 2 lakh crores on food subsidy. There's a PM Kisan scheme, 70,000 crores being spent. There's a Narega program, which can be anywhere from 70 to 90,000 crores. You have similar programs which are run by states, because you actually need to provide this kind of a support. So one thing is to say that we are going to become a 5 trillion economy, the fastest growing economy. But the real truth is that there are lots of people who require support. And I think it's a very responsible reaction from the government. It keeps people like us, economists, who keep giving pontificating, saying you should spend more on capex, less on welfare. But I think at the end of the day, governments have to work for the people. So I really think that this is the way in which we will be continuing until such point of time we're able to create enough jobs where we have fewer needy people who are reliant on the government all the time for support.
PN Vijay, do you concur with Madan, and especially the point about that if we were to extend Madan's argument about if we are going to be a much larger economy in terms of GDP, perhaps we will also need to be prepared for much higher prices. Of course, the vulnerable part has to be protected, but overall, we will have to deal with much higher prices across the board. PN Vijay.
Yeah, that economic fact I will not dispute at all. It's a fact which is borne by enough empirical evidence. The question again, to my mind, is one of putting income, not doles, into the hands of people. When we say, for example, 80 crore Indians are being fed free by the government for the last 2 years, what do we mean? We mean that these people don't have enough money to buy 2 morsels of food per day. When we say that Karnataka government gave, free saris or free bicycle, Tamil Nadu gave free bicycle, we mean that the population is at such a low level that these things make a difference. So when you talk about welfare economics, the underlying assumption is that we are a very poor country with a lot of very poor people, with hardly any income, with very little prospects of employment. So this is the real issue. There may be a lot of bandage being done by the central government, state government through umpteen schemes, etc. But it's unfortunate that no political leader has come out and said, the real problem in this country is continuous employment for the people, which will generate incomes, which will remove welfare slowly from the scheme of things. Nobody has got the guts or the maturity to come and say that. Till that time, Indian elections will be fought on which bandage is a bigger bandage, whether LPG price is a bigger bandage or saris is a bigger bandage, etc., which you will agree is not attempting to solve the core of the problem.
Absolutely, and quick fixes cannot help anyone, any party or government in power with regard to the fundamental issue of India's economy. Yes, we can see that India remains oasis of economic progress vis-a-vis many other countries, especially in the near region. We haven't even spoken about inflation rates in the countries that are next to us, and we perhaps don't even want to go there. But given the size of our population, given the needs that we have, perhaps growth that delivers jobs is the long-term answer to deal with the conundrum of inflation. Shankkar, Aiyar, Madan, Sabnavis, PN Vijay, thank you very much for your time with us on the show today, where we attempted to try and decode our politics and inflation. If you've been, thank you very much for watching.
Well, the festive season is here and so is the heightened demand for travel. The tourism and the hospitality sectors are gearing up to reap the maximum benefits from this peak season as demand both domestically and internationally rises. So much so that companies have already begun unveiling some of the festive season sales and discounted packages to woo travelers. Joining in to